Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you another battle group overview, and in this one we're going to be looking at the 2nd Infantry Indianhead for the Allies. Now this division is a very interesting one. It relies a lot on heavy infantry and artillery play. So let's just jump straight in and have a look at Recon. So, in the Recon tab, there's two units that you must have on this deck, and those are the Ranger Marauder squads. Now, these guys are extremely important, not only because they have very good optics and very good stealth, also because they have their experience, but mainly because they have this bazooka, and that's what makes them really so strong. So, in general, if this was a 2-star Recon squad with 3 men with 3 Thompsons, yes, it could be quite a proficient killing machine. However, with this extra bazooka, it's even more powerful and allows you to set up some really awesome ambushes and take out enemy armor extremely easily in certain situations. Now, you never want to get these caught out in the open, and you really want to use them sparingly because they're probably one of the best units on this deck. Very, very strong. If you buff them up to 3 stars, they basically won't miss their bazooka, and then you're going to get your kill every time, depending on what you're going for. I wouldn't really recommend putting them in buildings because it's too obvious for them. They can very easily hide in hedgerows and tree lines, and that's what I would suggest using them for. If we move on, I've got a card of these Recon here. These are the 2-man squads with Thompson machine guns and submachine guns before anyone gets technical, and an M20 APC. So basically this M20 comes with a 50 cal, and that's the reason that I bring the Recon in basically at all. In Phase A, this gives you some extra 50 cal vehicles that are incredibly useful for supporting your infantry, because as you'll see in the infantry tab, most of your infantry doesn't come in half tracks in this deck, so you can make up for it by using Recon with the support vehicles. Now you can just get Recon in the 30 cal Jeeps, but I find that the extra range of the 50 cal is worth having. Also, with the 50 cal you get better accuracy and a higher HE, so just in general a good support vehicle, and can be buffed by command units to make it even more effective. In Phase B I don't bring in the scout cars, although it is relatively tempting. But the main reason I don't is because you want 2 cards of Ranger Marauders and you only have 4 cards in the Recon. So to me the Scouts didn't really fit into my deck. And this M3 Scout is pretty decent as fire support, but still not worth having. So instead in Phase B I'm bringing in a card of M8 Greyhounds, which are pretty good units honestly. If they're buffed up correctly with supporting command units, they can definitely do a lot of damage. Currently these guys are extremely strong with the French, and these guys do cost more than the French, however still worth having in Phase B to support your tanks and infantry. Now moving on to the infantry tab, I have the Ranger Leader squad to start off with, and this is one of a few, well probably only a couple of decks really, where I have 2 command squads. So you can see that I have the Ranger Leader card here, and I also have the card of Rifles Leader later on, but we'll get to them later. The Ranger Leader in Phase A is just important. They have this satchel charge which makes them very nice, but they're just there in general to buff up your surrounding units, especially these units, the Ranger Supports. Now Ranger Supports are incredibly good because they are 2-star veterancy, and they have 2 machine guns. They have a very high HE as a squad, and as 3-star veterancy with the command buff, they can do a lot of damage. Now we're not really going to be looking much into the vehicles on this tab because they all come in different kinds of transport. But yeah, the Ranger Support, definitely a squad that you would like to bring in. Just the veterancy is so good. Now you could also go for the Ranger Assaults. These guys are okay, however I would only use them if you're going to get in range to use the Flamethrower. So if there is a large forest, or there is a town, a large town, that you can basically jump from building to building with, these guys are fantastic because their napalm will just basically kill enemy infantry very quickly. However, I don't find that I use them enough in order to give them a space on my deck. But if you do think you're going to be in that situation, then feel free to bring them in. They are still a very good squad, can be buffed to 3 stars, can be very proficient killing machines. I do have a card of the 12-man rifle squads in Phase A. You can get 4 of these fellas, and they all come in as 12 strength squads, and that is a very large squad of infantry. Makes them very resilient. They have 2 BARs, which again is very helpful. Allows them to engage at the 400 meter range, although they aren't the most powerful. Best thing about the rifles is they are just line infantry that allows you to hold the front line very effectively and for a long time. They are very resilient to enemy artillery, enemy tanks, all that kind of stuff, because they survive for a very long time, and that's what they're really good for digging in and holding the front line for you. Now, another squad that I have in Phase A is the Ranger M1919 Mmg. This machine gun, the 30 cal, extremely effective. It has, again, 2-star veterancy, and with a command squad nearby, can be buffed to 3 stars, which makes it exceptionally accurate, allows it to pin down enemy squads very quickly and kill them off. I used to have 2 cards of these instead of 2 cards of Ranger supports, but I found the Ranger supports to be a lot more versatile, and obviously they are cheaper, and that allows you to bring in more of them quicker, which allows you to basically control Phase A a lot more effectively. So that's basically my Phase A. If we move on to Phase B, I've got some more rifles again to hold the front line as we continue throughout the game. Then I have these rifles leaders. Now these are, I think, one of the only leader squads for the infantry that come as a strength of 10 in pretty much all the divisions, and they also have a bazooka. So they are incredibly useful. If you can get these guys into close range, they will do a lot of damage with those Thompson SMGs and the M1 carbines. And then they also have, obviously, the bazooka, which makes them great for picking off enemy vehicles, as well as buffing all of the units surrounding them. So a very useful leader squad to have with you. And in Phase B, where there's not much to choose from, well, definitely a choice that I would like to take. Now, it's very possible to bring in the GMC-HMG. This is the truck with a 50 cal mounted on the top of it. And some people would suggest this because you would get a 2-star 50 cal. However, I find that with this truck, it has no armor, and therefore does get picked off very easily by opposing machine guns. And especially like half tracks could just come around the corner and take this out very easily. So I just don't find it as useful as some people make out it to be. However, it's definitely worth trying if you want those extra 50 cals. Now, speaking of 50 cals, in Phase B you can get a 50 cal squad, and I would definitely recommend bringing in at least a card of these. The great thing about 50 cals in this game is they can engage enemy light armor, and they can kill off basically anything with 2 front and side armor if they get lucky, which is extremely useful. They can also help pin them down, which is even more useful. So these guys are great for that. They have the 800 meter range, the 9 HE power. They can pin down infantry squads very quickly. They can pin down enemy light armor. And in Phase B, definitely something that I find useful to maybe put in a building to hold a strong point. Very useful for that. Now, some people would opt to having another rifle squad card in Phase C to have 8 more rifles at your disposal. Something to consider. However, I find that Phase A and B are definitely the most important, and that is when I'm going to be buying the majority of my infantry. If I don't have any infantry left by Phase C, then it's my fault, and basically I should never really be in that position. Now we can move on to tanks. Tanks are very interesting in this deck. You can see that the M4A1DDs, they have the amphibious netting around them to help them on their landings. But in this game, this does allow them to traverse rivers and other basically ponds or whatever spaces of water that you'd like to cross. Very, very useful in certain maps, but generally not used too often. The great thing about the M4A1DD is that it does come 1-star vetted, It's actually quite a great support vehicle for your Phase A pushes. And with a command infantry nearby, you can make it 2 stars, and then it becomes even more useful. And they are only 120 points, which is very, very nice. Moving on to Phase B, I have 2 cards of the Command M4A1s. Now, I would have 1 Command M4A1 and 1 card of the M4A1DDs. However, basically the reason I have more Command M4A1s is because there isn't actually that much command available in this deck. So I've got the 2 Command Infantry squads, I've got the 2 Command tanks there, but in support I don't bring in a command vehicle. So I need to find that command elsewhere, which in my case is from tanks. And since tanks aren't basically the staple of this deck, Command M4A1s was where I went in order to fill out that purpose. Now in Phase C, I do take the card of Rhinos for 140 points, an upgrade from the 130 point command tanks. These guys are okay. They're good fillers, you get 5 of them, and they can help you push with armor later in the game in weak points. However, you don't really want to be bumping into anything with high AP like Tigers, Panthers, or King Tigers. You're not going to have a great time. However, you can push against infantry very easily thanks to the 2 30 cals and the 50 cal. The 3 machine gun fire supports into weak positions can be extremely effective, supported by a command tank, and well, you got yourself the key to success. So that's pretty much tanks. Let's move on to support. In support, in Phase A, I'm bringing in the command or the supply truck. Now you only get 1 of these. Use them sparingly. They have 1500 supply, which is pretty great. Or 15,000 supply, not 1500. Very, very good. But you need to keep them safe. If you lose it, then you lose a command, or you lose your supply for the entire game. So keep it in a safe place, move your vehicles back to it to use it to resupply, and it should be perfectly fine for the majority of the game. Now I also bring in 1 of the 2-star T30 HMCs. Now these I've had mixed results with. They have a very low velocity fire with that main gun, and it's only got an accuracy of 4. So although they are 2-star veterancy, they actually aren't particularly accurate in using their AP value because they don't actually hit their target the majority of the time. However, they are great for taking out enemy infantry. However, they do need to hit directly. They don't have an AoE value, so they don't. If the shot lands next to an infantry, it might stun them, but it won't actually do too much damage. You have to be aware of that. However, when these guys do land on target, and they do land on target quite a lot once they're 3-star with a command unit nearby, they can be extremely proficient. But again, I've had mixed results. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't, sometimes they get destroyed easily because they only have 3 armor, and so on and so on. Now, one thing that I would recommend possibly changing for my support is bringing in an M3 commands in Phase A. Now, a lot of people look at these when they start the game and they go, well, these are useless, it's just a truck with no armament. However, the command radius is so important in this deck to buff your infantry to be 3 stars, as well as many of the other units on the deck. And where I'm relying mostly on my tanks, it can often end up for me with this deck where I don't have enough command units in order to make the pushes where I need to with the mobility I need. So the tanks are relatively slow. These guys are okay. 23 km/h speed off-road allows them to support a push quite nicely. So it's definitely something that you could think about bringing, for sure. And something that I wouldn't shun anyone from doing. And these 50 cal Jeeps, I've said before, don't particularly like them. They're great if they keep them out of range of enemy fire, but as soon as they come under fire, they are dead. I've also got the 2 M7DDs in this deck. These guys are just fantastic Phase A units. And there isn't really much that can stop you from using these. They have the 1200 meter range with 15 HE power. These guys can take out the pesky 1000 meter AT guns for you very easily. And once they are buffed up with command radius, 2-star veterancy, not going to miss too often. So very, very strong unit, great fire support for your infantry, definitely worth bringing. And I bring in 2 cards because often I would bring in 2 in phase A. The only thing you have to be worried about is obviously enemy armor. You don't want to be bumping into an enemy Firefly at the start on the 21st or 12th Panzer, SS Panzer Division. That could hurt. So just keep them safe, play smart with them, and you'll have a good time. Now Flamethrowers in this deck I just find aren't worthy for a phase B card. 2-star or 2 strength units. If you want Flamethrowers, bring them in as infantry under the Ranger Assault Squads. You could choose to opt out from bringing a phase A duck and bring in 2 in phase B for more supply. You could also bring in some M20 commands in phase B. This is another thing that I would definitely recommend if you can find the extra slots from other tabs. And then in phase B also you can get some more T30 HMCs, however at this point I wouldn't recommend bringing those in. More supply in phase C, again your choice, but by phase C I don't think you'll be needing that much supply unless you're playing on like a unlimited time limit game on total destruction. It really depends on the kind of deck you're building. A lot of things change if you're playing 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, 4v4 or just total destruction. Now if we move on to anti-tank, anti-tank's probably where this deck can really strive. Now a lot of people complain about these 76mm M5 guns, however I actually find that they can be extremely useful if used in the right situations. But before we talk about those, let's talk about the M1 gun. I bring in 1 card of these in phase A, and I tend to bring in all of them at the start of the game, just because they are the only thing that really stop you from being overrun by enemy half tracks and armor at the start of the game. Your M7 double Ds, these guys can actually take out light armor. Forgot to mention that quite proficiently. Light armor, that is, like the enemy half tracks and the SPW 222s and so on. These guys can take them out, so be wary of that. But these M1 guns can help you take out anything heavier. For example, the Firefly, or any other heavier tanks like the Panzer 35s, for instance. These guys can help you deal with those, and that's why they are so important at the start of the game. Unless you really know what you're up against, I would always recommend bringing them in. As we move on to phase C, well, you can bring in 3 M5 guns on one of these cards, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm also going to bring in an M10A1 Destroyer. I love having the M10 Tank Destroyers available because they are very versatile and can move around very quickly. They have the 12,000 meter range, which is the same as the 76mm M5 gun, and this is what makes them so good. And especially for engaging phase B armor, this range is extremely important. Put them in the right places and they can do you wonders. Make sure that you have a command unit nearby, as otherwise you may be suffering with accuracy a little. But generally I find that they are extremely useful and worth having. Now some people would argue that bringing in an M5 gun 76mm in phase A is worth doing. However, I tend to find that the M1 guns can do the job in phase A. Bazookas aren't necessarily needed in this deck. I find that they're a waste of a card when you have the Ranger Marauders available. So that's why I don't bring those in. And then as we move on, I've got another 4 M5 guns in phase C and 2 of these 2-star M10A1 Destroyers. Again, keep them by commands and you're going to have 3-star M10s with 12,000 meter range and 13 AP. Allows you to seriously do damage to a lot of German armor. So that's why you want to bring those in. Let's move on to anti-air. So my anti-air tab is pretty interesting. In phase A, I've got 2 M15 CGMCs. And these are 100-point trucks with a M1A2 37mm autocannon alongside 2 Browning 50 cals. Now this is a very potent combination for shooting down enemy aircraft. It really is. It does a lot of morale damage very quickly and can force enemy aircraft, light aircraft especially, out of the sky very quickly. And in phase A, if you bring in both of them and keep them together, they will do that job very nicely. So that's why I like to bring them in, and they are mobile, so you can keep them away from enemy mortars and enemy airstrikes as well, because you can just keep moving them about, and hopefully the enemy will never catch on. However, if you bring in Bofors in Phase A, it can be relatively vulnerable to mortars, for example, artillery, and enemy airstrikes. So that's why I don't tend to bring in the Bofors, although you could very easily switch out one of the M15 CGMCs for a Bofors, and then keep the Bofors together, and then bring over the M15 every time you spotted enemy air coming in. Now in Phase B, I've got more of those. I don't tend to enjoy bringing in the M16 MGMCs because I don't find they provide enough suppression quick enough compared to the CGMCs. Also, they lack the range, so 800 meter range on these fellas. CGMCs have the 1000 meter range on the 37mm gun, so that's way more useful and better suppression. And then in Phase C, I got a card of 4 Bofors. So basically, I was tempted to just have like another card of M15 CGMCs and just have 6 of them and just hopefully keep them alive for most of the game. But generally, that's quite unrealistic. Whereas if you have Bofors, like enough of them, and you bring them in at the same time, you definitely can set up a good AA network in order to basically get rid of light aircraft. Bombers will still break through your heavy AA, just saying. So don't expect them to live very long if your enemy starts bringing in Ju-88s, and if they do, just stop investing in AA because it just won't do anything. Now moving on to artillery. This is where things get pretty interesting and where this deck is actually quite powerful. In Phase A, you can get a Ranger Mortar Squad, which has 2-star veterancy. Now this is extremely important because by a command squad, it becomes 3 stars, and you get extra rate of fire. And these things fire like machine guns as mortars, which is absolutely incredible. It's very, very potent for stunning enemy units and pinning them down. Not necessarily for doing damage, since their HE value is quite low, but will definitely pin down enemy units. So that's what you would be using them for, and that's why I would suggest bringing in at least 1 card of these on your deck. In Phase A, you can also bring in 2 107mm mortars, and these are the ones that you would use to do damage. So they have 16 HE power, and are very strong. Now if you'll find that you're bringing in the Ranger Mortars in Phase A and not necessarily using the Ranger Mortar or the Mortar 107mm in Phase A 2, then what you can do is swap out a card of the Phase A 107mm for the Phase B 107mm, so you can get 4 of them instead of 2. Definitely something that I've been playing with recently, because I find that I only use the Ranger Mortar Squads in Phase A just to stun and use smoke. The other great thing about these 107mm though, that I have found, and the reason I bring them in Phase A, is because of their range. Whereas sometimes like the 60mm mortars just don't have the range to be as effective as a 107mm mortar, especially for smoking. And that extra range can really, really be helpful. So that's why I've got them both in Phase A, and I don't tend to use artillery as much as other players, I don't think. Now in Phase B, I've got the 2 xylophones that you can bring in. Now these are fantastic, just because they have multiple launchers. They can fire, I think, about 3 salvos before they have to reload, and they're only 100 points. Just make sure you reposition them after you fire them, because they literally have no armor. If they get like mortared, they can just blow up by a direct hit. So yeah, just make sure you move them after you fire them, and you should be safe with these guys. 1,300 meter range means you need to be careful of those 1,200 meter AT guns and tanks. Be wary of that. Don't let them get in line of sight. Otherwise, really, really good, solid artillery unit. I used to have 3 M2A1 howitzers and 1 xylophone for Phase B. However, I found that I use the xylophones way more, just because rocket artillery is so much more effective for saturating an area before you attack it, and that's really what you have to do with artillery. Don't just arty something for the sake of it. Arty it because you're going to attack it, or because you're going to go round it. You know, you want to pin down all of those units so that you can exploit that, not just for the sake of it. As for off-map, Well, some people do like to bring in the M3 OPs for the 203mm battery, which is relatively strong with the 22 HE power and 65m splash damage. However, I'm not really a fan of the off-map artillery unless it's relatively, well, much higher than 203. Same reason I don't bring in the M4A1s in Phase B, because although 3 machine guns on a tank is relatively useful in certain situations, the 16 HE on the 155mm off-map artillery I don't find to be terribly useful compared to the xylophones, which definitely do the job. Now you can wait and bring in 2 more xylophones in Phase C instead of having a second one in Phase B, but again, I generally play for Phase A and Phase B to gain my advantage earlier in the game. And that's what I would recommend most people doing, unless you're going to be playing, for example, a total destruction game, where the game you know is going to go on for a long time and therefore having more availability is worth more to you. Let's move on to air. This is quite a long video already, so let's just get through the air tab, because the air tab for the 2nd Infantry is actually relatively large. In Phase A, you definitely want fighters. Bring in 2 P38 Lightnings. These guys have 4 50 cals and a 20mm cannon. These guys are absolutely crazy. They're very fast and they have a decent agility. So just there to really take control of the skies in Phase A, and that's what I would use them for. Moving on to Phase B, I have some more lightnings, but these guys have rockets. Now these rockets aren't there to kill, they're just there to stun, and they're great for stunning AT positions, machine guns and infantry. Don't really use them on tanks because it'll kind of be a waste of time. They only have 10 HE and generally they're not very accurate, so it's not particularly useful, but they're great also for controlling the skies, so that's why I bring in P38s. So not only do they have the versatility of attacking things on the ground with those rockets, but furthermore they can also take things out of the sky with their very fast speed. They're a little bit slower than the P38 Lightning fighters, but still fast enough to do the job. Now, some people may prefer to bring in maybe 1 card of Lightnings and 1 card of Thunderbolts. Definitely something worth doing. 850 cals definitely going to do work, and the 700 km/h speed also very, very good. However, they are 20 points more, and the P38 Lightnings I always find do the job if you use them smartly. I don't bring in the bombers. The 15 HE is okay for taking out enemy emplacements, but I just find that these guys, they have bad agility. If you're going to bring them in, you need to make sure you have control of the skies. So for example, again, this is a chance where you could swap out maybe a P38 Lightning card or a P47 Thunderbolt. I've just found the P38s to be more useful, and that's why I prefer them, just from my own testing. But I know a lot of people do prefer Thunderbolts. Moving into Phase C, well, I do have the P38s again, this time with the 2 25 HE power 450 kilogram bombs each, and well, that's extremely potent. You're not going to be seeing much surviving from that, and you can bring in 4 of them, and that's what I've done. You can also get the P47 Thunderbolt with the rockets, which some people like to use to try and kill enemy armor. However, I don't find them very effective or very useful. So yeah, rocket planes, only there really for stunning things, and that's what you could use them for. Bombers really just destroy things, and the P38s with the 25 HE bombs definitely do the job once you get into Phase C. So the only thing when it comes to air that I would possibly change in my own deck is taking out maybe a P38 Lightning for P47 Thunderbolts with the bombs, with the 115 HE bomb, because that could definitely kill off some pesky AT for you and stuff like that. That's pretty much my units and why I bring them in. Let's talk about how they complement each other. So in this deck, it's a very interesting one because you rely a lot on your mortars early on, and because of that, you should be using smoke. So smoke is probably one of the staple things for this deck. You have a lot of infantry, a lot of quite cheap infantry, like rifle squads are only 20 points, ranger support squads 20 points, ranger leader 20 points. You know, even your 30 cal with 2 stars is 30 points, not too much. So you're going to be bringing in a lot of infantry in Phase A. You can support that maybe with 1 M4A1 maybe a M7DD, you're going to want all of your AT guns. But those mortars, if you use smoke correctly, will allow you to advance with your Ranger Support Squads, your Ranger Marauders from the Recon tab, and really make a slow but concerted effort in a certain place on the map. If they come in with their own artillery, try and stop you with mortars and so on, the resilience of rifle squads and Ranger Support Squads is extremely useful. Now those Ranger Marauders, one thing that is not really mentioned is that they do have an evasion stat. Now Recon, I think they're probably going to change it, and this may come under balancing in the future, but they have an evasion stat. The higher experienced they are, the less likely they are to be hit, which is very useful for Ranger Marauders and does allow them to just stand there and take fire forever and basically, I don't know, it's like one of those movies where there's just a man standing there and all the bullets go everywhere but don't hit him. It's like the miracle occurs. It's kind of like that. And when they're 3 stars, that definitely happens a lot. But either way, you don't want to be getting them in that position in the first place, so use smoke. Smoke them. Use the smoke. If you need longer range smoke, use the 107mm mortar. If they're in range of 900 meters, then use the 60mm mortar. And you can just basically use them in tandem also. You could bring in one 60mm mortar, one 107mm mortar, use a 60mm mortar with a high rate of fire to stun enemy units, whilst the 107mm places down the smoke to prevent fire support from making the difference in those fights where your infantry is most definitely going to win if it is buffed up by nearby command units. And that's basically how this deck works. It's quite a slow deck, a quite slow rolling deck, but if you use smoke effectively and you use your fire support effectively, for example the M7DDs and the M4A1s, you know, they're infantry support. Everything about this deck is about supporting your infantry moving forwards, including your AT guns as well. It's all about your infantry positioning and keeping them safe. If you want to hit a hard point, use a xylophone. Get your M7DDs to fire position targets, and you should be good. Your Air Force is primarily about really supporting and controlling the skies, and then in Phase C, when you get to that point, you can use the P-38s to help you break hard positions. So that's pretty much it. That's my look at the 2nd Infantry. Make sure you guys let me know what you think of this deck, what you guys do with this deck, if there's anything that you think that I've necessarily taken wrong in this deck or anything that you would prefer. Please let me know in the comments. I'd really like to see your thoughts and read your thoughts and opinions about my deck and also your own decks. It's always really interesting to read. So thanks for getting involved, guys. I've noticed it a lot on my other videos. And thanks for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.